Okay, so in class today, we're going to switch gears a little bit. Last week, right, Mike McFall is here joining us, talking to us about Big B and what he's done there, opportunity identification, knowing yourself, hubris, and humility. We're going to go back to revisit a speaker and a topic we talked about last time. Think way back in January, Richard Louie was here to join us, speaking about the Industrial Revolution, the selfless economy, the cataclysms that more or less tie into that. We're going back to revisit that conversation today as part of the three-part lecture in this class, where he's going to discuss some principles around what that means, and I'll leave it at that so that I don't get further carried away with it. What I want you to understand about this is, I've had several conversations with Richard about this, getting my understanding of it. I'm asking y'all to switch your mindset from last week to this week. It's totally good and okay and encouraged to have questions and not understand it. Please do not hesitate to ask for clarification at any point. It will serve you well, I promise you that. And without further ado, please help me welcome my good friend, Richard.
Good morning. Thank you, Eric. Thanks so much. Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. And thanks for spending time again to hang out with me. And as Eric was saying, as you might remember from my first visit with you way back when, I come at this as a journalist who has looked at a lot of different sectors in our society and trying to put together a so what and an answer to why as to what I'm seeing in some of the spaces. And so the idea of cataclysms, the idea of the selfless economy was what I discussed the first time, and I wanted to go back and think about some of the indications over time in terms of the case studies that we might consider, right? Because last time I spoke mostly about the concept, as opposed to going through some case examples. And so I wanted to go back to a little bit way back, and that's 1602. And when we think of 1602, if there's a, if you will, let there be light moment for capitalism, what you might call the radioactive spider bite origin story for the commercial engine that drives the modern world today, it's got to be the chartering of the Dutch East India Company, the DEIC of the 1600s. Now, the open seas of that time, of the 17th century, were amongst the riskiest investments in economic history. You had piracy, disease, navigational errors, and you actually had sharks, many of them. Any one of a number of these factors could have spelled financial ruin for the investors financing a voyage during the 17th century. The Dutch East India Company was born out of that environment, spreading the risk across entire fleets across the world, going Dutch, if you will, so to speak. It was the birth of the multinational corporation. Through the creation of a fixed, secure, and orderly entity, they were bonded together, managed and expanded for the good of all the residents of all the provinces. That was the mission. That was the charter, actually, of the DEIC that I was just paraphrasing. The charter was for 21 years. The Dutch East India Company lasted, though, from that 2-decade charter for 2 centuries. Now, since the Dutch East India Company was chartered back in 1602, religious and secular business leaders believed business ventures would create wealth, right? And they would expand opportunity and bring the benefits of prosperity to many corners of the world. It was the world's first multinational corporation and monopoly on the Far East spice and textile trade. Cumin, cashmere, for everybody. Its founders pledged it would stabilize volatile spice supplies and prices, and along the way would supercharge Dutch GDP. In the decades that followed, the company accumulated incredible power, building forts, maintaining armies, negotiating treaties, all along the way, coining its own currency, among other things, while making the Low Country economy the envy of the world of the time. And according to Business Insider, the DEIC would have been worth $7.9 trillion in today's currency at its peak. And for perspective, you could buy all the real estate today in New York City 9 times over with that market value, with that amount of money. Or you could wear a different pair of clogs every single day for the rest of your life. But by the early 1700s, the Dutch East India Company had become corrupt. Just dozens of years after it started. Its leaders and employees oversaw the growth of the African slave trade, colonization, and the exploitation of indigenous populations. A 1740 massacre as well of Chinese immigrants in Batavia's Dutch East Indies city was the beginning of the end for this great empire. The company dissolved in 1799 like an Alka-Seltzer in the North Sea. The DEIC was the first large-scale example of the shark business model, if we can put it that way. And over the centuries, the pattern repeated itself predictably. Businesses and industries began with promises of wealth, improved health, freedom, leisure time, and a better quality of life. They start well, as you can see here, not just for the owners and investors, but for employees and society too. The good intentions also lead to promises fulfilled, as with the industrial era of the 18th and 19th centuries. However, when personal ego, the hunger for wealth and profit, and the temptation to bond, or rather bend the rules, erode those lofty aspirations, the mission is discarded for profit. God dethroned in favor of mammon, and disaster often results. Capitalism has brought us wondrous new technologies, as all of you know, connected the world, cured disease in our time and times before, and gotten us to the moon and Mars and beyond. It has been a mighty force for creating wealth for all of us, lifting people out of poverty, increasing our living standards. But its extremes have also contributed to the dysfunctional state of the economy, society, and ecology as well. Both good and bad living together. So as I discussed last time, it has led to today's selfish pandemic. Like no cataclysm since the Great Depression, that which we all lived through together in the last 3 years has fractured the economy, healthcare, educational systems, and social fabric, revealing things under the surface broken. We didn't see these things that were broken and that they appeared to be on repair. And that led us to this slide. You remember this from a month ago when I was here in the beginning of your semester, the good things about cataclysms. I'm not going to go through each and every one of the industrial eras, but just as a refresher, with catastrophe also comes moments of corporate grace, when people can also see that cataclysms reach for something higher, something that is selfless in business. The signs of what 4.0 that all of you get to lead and create potentially. And they're already starting to become visible. Some examples that I didn't have the time to bring to you last time. Formlabs. Until March 2020, Formlabs, a 3D printing startup based in suburban Boston, had been fabricating medical devices for doctor and dentist offices. But as the need for coronavirus testing became dire, leadership pivoted to printing COVID-19 nasal test swabs. So they turned their business model around. You remember many of those stories from the towns that you hail from, certainly in the Midwest, pivoting in its strong manufacturing base to create solutions and help for all of us across the country and globally. Formlabs was similar to that very idea of what happened here in Michigan. They had to design the swabs and equipment. They had to repurpose their manufacturing facility and earn FDA approval. But by mid-April, in a month's time, Formlabs was printing tens of thousands of swabs per week. And why go to such trouble? They say, according to the company's director of healthcare, quote, "We didn't do it for profit. There was a clear societal and public health need," unquote. Now, that similar story that we've all seen in our own spaces, we think of some such corporations have been with us for decades. And there have been before the last 3 years. Yvon Chouinard launched his outdoor apparel company, Patagonia, in '73. The private company, as many of you know, donates 1% of its sales revenue to environmental groups, but what is unique are the links to which Chouinard and his company are willing to go to put their money where their beliefs are. And so when we think of Form Labs and Chouinard, are they 3.0 or are they 4.0? Are they the turn that we're suggesting that might be happening in front of us? For instance, for Patagonia, to add more fodder to that discussion, in 2012, Patagonia became a certified B Corp. And in 2016, it began donating 100% of its sales on Black Fridays to environmental nonprofits. Patagonia has boycotted major outdoor retailer trade shows because they supported poor land use policies, as an example. It created a worn wear program that many of you may participate in that allows customers to return and turn their used items for merchandise credit. Anybody done that here? I've done one or two myself, thank you. They then recondition and resell them. It also gave $10 million that it received from 2017 tax cuts and from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to groups committed to protecting air, land, and water and finding solutions to the climate crisis. As it has since 1985, they still do that 1% I was mentioning. And those grassroots environmental groups, they get these small grants up to $15,000. That's a lot of grants. And just recently, they created the Hold Fast Collective. Yvon Chouinard said, I don't want to own this billion-dollar company anymore. I only want 2%. I'm going to give 98% to the Hold Fast Collective. I'm going to create this Hold Fast Collective, which now owns 98% of the company and 2% for Chouinard and his family. And with that Hold Fast Collective, it is now the second activist arm of what he's doing through Patagonia. It's a nonprofit that will funnel larger grants and donations in the millions of dollars. Also in April, the company will formally launch a third unit, Home Planet Fund, a nonprofit that will fundraise and funnel money to those fighting climate change in isolated and fragile regions, with particular attention to indigenous communities. Despite all of that, or perhaps because of it, right? Patagonia did almost $1 billion in revenue in 2019, and they're only growing. They had one of the lowest employee turnover rates as well, 4%. 4%. In all American business, they sit at the very lowest in terms of turnover. Noteworthy how Patagonia turned fleecing the public into something good. So is that 3.0 or 4.0? In the 2020s, we're seeing more and more companies conceptualize not just for profit, but for purpose. Trapelo is a cloud-based tech startup that delivers telehealth program design, business consulting, and healthcare support and logistics. Their methodology and remote services have reduced medical costs by up to 30% on average, and they've reduced hospital readmission by 50%. The birth of telehealth that we all took part of, I'm guessing, during the last 3 years, that's what really caused a spike. But it begs the question of whether an elastic or remote worker could be more efficient and even produce safer solutions than we imagined before in healthcare. An Owl Labs research report indicates that 90% of workers are more productive when working from home. That might be a little high, but let's just take even half of that. Productivity coupled with innovation proves that virtual solutions, not just in healthcare, may be a facilitator and another market indicator. You know, new startups are also getting in on the ground floor of what could be the path to 4.0 as well, not these established companies of big and small I just mentioned. Tim Ellis found himself at the peak of his career in 2015. He had been working for a company called Blue Origin, and was the youngest member of the National Space Council Users Group, Council Users Advisory Group, and directly advised the U.S. White House on all space policy. How much fun would that be? But in 2015, he set out to do something a little bit more. What he did is he launched Relativity Space with a new approach to an old market, disrupting 60 years of established aerospace technology by entering space not just through force, but through printing. Ellis set out to change the entire scope of the industry, developing a more sustainable solution to entering multi-planetary exploration. His solution in rocket development is a 10 times faster in production time, and it uses 100 times fewer parts, and is the first autonomous rocket factory ever developed. So my friends, if you like to watch news, watch the news. In the coming weeks, Ellis will have potentially his first launch. The technology that Relativity is breaking into has completely changed the scope of the space industry, and we may see it in the next month. And it begs the question, what more is to come in this new era? Is it a selfless economy? Is it what you see here? This idea that when the market favors industries that create selfless competencies and operations to reach efficient societal outcomes. There's some ideas and case examples that say we might be making that turn. Stories like these show an increasing awareness that business realities have changed, perhaps permanently, perhaps in part, perhaps to some degree. The employee-employer relationship, long the most important relationship by some measures in society after our families, has become more intertwined and intimate. Employees' ability to adapt to keep businesses operating over the last 3 years, it's just astounding. I keep on thinking of the numbers. I mean, in our country alone, half of the employees, over 150 million people, depend on their employers for employment while making it possible to do great things. That happened during the last 3 years. Globally, we had 3.5 billion employees work together with their employers to make it work. Church and state, government, society, business, church, culture, and the walls that traditionally stood between them seem to be coming down. Corporate boards, if you've been watching the conversations that they're having lately, is how do we really diversify? How do we really be inclusive? How do we really move to action at the board level and invest in all of our communities for business and activism and speak out on social issues? That often, again, was church and state, right? Business talking about societal issues at the level that they've been doing is unheard of. Businesses vary certainly in their services, right? There's certain businesses that we use on Tuesdays versus the businesses we go to on Thursdays. There's some things we don't even see as businesses, we just see them as there. I get my coffee. That's where I go to get it. Thus, not every business cannot be selfless necessarily in the same way, right? Because if you're a different type of business, just like you enact the way you make coffee in a different way, the way you might exhibit the ability to think of others or to be a selfless business will also be different. So let's not think of this as in black and white, in a sort of, polar evil or non-profit lens, a 1 or 0. We should instead embrace the idea of a continuum, something that may look like this. From purely for-profit ranging to nonprofit. And let's rethink also that continuum. As you see, we explore in this simple slide. A bolder possibility is the epitome of a new selfless economy where we do move up and down this continuum that you see on the screen, that businesses like you and I as humans are fluid. The way we are helping others one day is different than we help others tomorrow. And then I might go back to the way I did it yesterday again. Shouldn't we allow businesses to be the same as they lead? And again, not all fit into one category on either side of this continuum. But let's watch their activity sets. The final step in this shift is perhaps moral, ethical, and spiritual. It isn't merely a change in how a business operates or its core purpose. It's a complete reimagining of what business is for. Not solely an engine of production and economic growth, but the primary motive for long-term positive social, cultural, governmental, and ecological metamorphosis, or the idea thereof. And so you see on this chart, on the left, the idea of for-profit, what has been debated greatly in all corners of our society, both on the Hill, on Wall Street, and Main Street, of what for-profit businesses do. Who are the shareholders? What is shareholder value? ESG, is it a political move, or is it truly a business move? And the examples are numerous, as I note here. In the not-for-profit space, you see that you have this idea of a non-shareholder-focused core objective set that can be categorized in the 501c3 space or for-profit at the same time. Kind Bars is a good example if you look at what Daniel Lubetzky has been doing, similar to Yvon Chouinard, finding the cracks in the space where the water can make it through. Consumer cooperatives. Who shops at REI? Who goes to a food co-op? I've never thought twice about any of these spaces in terms of what they might mean, about how we can restructure the way we make money and the way we share profit, and therefore the strategic and democratic values that we hold in our society to potentially in business. The B Corp, which I brought up earlier, with Patagonia, and Ben & Jerry's, of course, and nonprofit. Not also perfect, dedicated to social impact with low profit motivation. But of course, we also have cases where they get off the straight and narrow, don't they? Rand Corporation, Habitat for Humanity, and something that we all watch, PBS, in addition. So when we think of this final step in this shift, these are some of the spaces in the continuum that we can look at. And as we move, as people and as entities, and when you start your business, allow for that. Can your corporate caterpillar become a revolutionary butterfly? One of the early driving notions of capitalism was the need to transfer the centralized power of the state into the people's hands. As I mentioned last time, that central, non-transparent arbiter set, the state, the royal family, or government in control of scarce resources and value creation at the same time, they were not working for most of their citizenry. In comes capitalism. It was to let citizens form systems of value creation and distribution of goods alongside the state or in its place, so that society can function more efficiently and prosperously and happily too. And one of capitalism's charter goals was to create a system to distribute scarce resources, all run by us, giving choice to us by the values that we had and carry. In a sense, to have a selfless economy not run by one or a few, but by all of us and for each one of us. And today, we have a chance to dig back into that original idea, to make that original intent a reality. So, meet the dolphin. Back in 2004, a lifeguard named Rob Howes had taken his daughter and two friends swimming off a beach in New Zealand when they found themselves surrounded by a group of dolphins, swimming around them in tight circles. Initially perplexed, Howes then saw the reason for the animal's behavior. A 3-meter great white shark cruising towards those 4 humans before veering off were repelled by the dolphins that swam in front and protected Howes and his family. The dolphin is nature's altruist, right? Who doesn't like a dolphin? Pods have willingly put themselves at risk, as the example I just mentioned, to care for the injured or the sick and aid humans in distress in the ocean. Yet despite a generous spirit of self-sacrifice that seems to defy the doctrine of survival of the fittest, dolphins thrive even when facing constant threats from humans and their insatiable hunger for tuna salad. Dolphin enterprises place selfless service at least on par with profitability and growth as core business objectives, sometimes above profit. If you will, dolphin leaders know that leading with integrity, compassion, and selflessness is a successful competitive strategy, not a disadvantage. In following the golden rule written in every single text, religious or otherwise, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They win the love and loyalty of customers and the esteem of elected officials and the press, all while avoiding scandal and fraud that bring down so many shark businesses. In selfless enterprises, rather than prioritize the bottom line at the expense of all else, a high priority is creating good for customers, employees, and community. And by operating this way, businesses develop some muscle tone, a sinew that enables selfless service and doing good to become natural movements, right? When you're trained up and fit, you react naturally. Profit, growth, innovation, and competitiveness remain core objectives, but their core purpose, is to bring about change at the personal, emotional level. The industrial eras of the past aspired to a lot of great things, as I was bringing up with the DEIC. This time, it is to do the ultimate thing, as its origin aimed to do, not to protect and defend the benefit of the few, but to pioneer and explore what can help many. We can see the tide turning. Successful early-stage selfless enterprises, as I mentioned. Here's one more, Formlabs, Patagonia, and Better.com. Even the spiritual world is calling for change in all of this. October 2020, Pope Francis stated that the magic theories of capitalism had to change and evolve given what... Hey, how's it going, man?
Sorry, we just refogged this in. It's not...
Oh, I blacked it out.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I blacked it out. Yeah, I blacked it out. It's fine. Fine. Golly, it was that bad that I was like, the hook was coming to get me, and I was like, this is over. You see, I was trying to ignore them. I was like, I've had bad speeches before, but this one's really bad. There are no more slides at this moment. Next time I'll just say no slide up there. Eric, this is just going downhill quickly. This is just... So what might a dolphin so-called business look like, as I was just talking about? There are some considerations or principles of what that might look like. And I'm just going to share 3 ideas with you. I'm only a couple years into thinking through this, but I wanted, if you don't mind, to share some with you, and I'd love to get your feedback as we go. It works. And that is the principle of 5149. And when we think of the idea of principle 5149, I really actually want to get to this one first, which is the principle of the chosen. And the principle of the chosen, as many of you might recognize, is that C.K. Prahalad, who was a proud Wolverine for many years. And C.K. was, as I mentioned in my first conversation, my teacher. And what do I mean by a business that is chosen? What are you chosen to be, and why? Who is doing the choosing? The binary that it's either the market or the business, but really it is both. The market wants something, and the business listens and evolves to provide what it can to satisfy the market, right? Which is going back to that chart of what the market might want right now, the selfless economy, maybe. The chosen question, the principle of being the chosen, should be answered frequently. What is your business chosen to do, and why? Is your business chosen to be selfless? As CK said, and said many times, and taught me so many decades ago, not too far from this hall, there are two ways of looking at that question of what you are chosen to do. What is your core competency? And what is your complementary capability? His argument is that all of you and all of your businesses, when you start them, have something indelibly magnificent and singular that nobody else does better. What is that core competency? And what can you do to leverage that core competency, either if it is inherently selfless or if you would like to answer this new economic era's call to consider the dolphin business? How are you chosen? Then decide to pivot into this space. That was his calling. In other words, and he wrote on this, by the way, very, very strongly in many of his books about this idea of selflessness, and it's not the first time I'm mentioning it. So in other words, selflessness, not shoes, not mobile apps or copper tubing, is their core competency, the chief means by which you deliver value. Figure that out. Is selflessness then in your business a side capability or a main capability? And in the end, being chosen means finding out where in that continuum I laid out earlier you can then activate and where you can turn that into your duty. Here's an example. Esri is the leading global mapping technology. In 1969, the CEO, Jack Dangermond, founded the company with a vision to supply comprehensive and scalable digital growth patterns to businesses. Before, this translated to land use planning and map making. Yet as the world had modernized and global issues arose, Esri molded their business pursuits to address challenges not just for their consumers, but for the world. And then when COVID hit, Dangermond realized they could be a key leader in modeling and minimizing the spread of that very disease, optimizing energy transmission systems. They used strategic planning, trying to focus on health equity, mapping racial inequality, healthcare access as well. And from there, they transformed their business and their practices to focus on what other social good alternatives they could provide. Now they focus on uplifting communities in need and help them gain access to healthcare, mapping, and epidemics worldwide, looking at water distribution routes, and much more. Core competency, digital mapping. Selflessness, pivot. The chosen. 5149. And the principle and the idea of it. You know, I said this earlier, that this whole idea of polar simplicity of ones or zeros, things are good or not. I know that immediately when we were talking about it, you know, earlier in the semester, that the first thing you're probably thinking is, oh, I can think of this example where they're supposed to be good, right? But they're not a selfless business, and they do all these things that aren't good. And then on the other side, the ones that are supposedly not good, and they're doing these great things with ESG. Look at that example as well. And so the idea behind this, and which is really driven by my upbringing that I may have mentioned before, was that I often saw the very same thing as a kid growing up, watching my dad, who was a pastor, and I would say, this guy is the most imperfect guy in the world. How could he be a pastor? Forget this stuff. He's crazy. And then I realized that over time, my dad was a very imperfect person. Didn't mean he's a bad person. But if we carry that forward into business, and that very idea, as I've worked for many of my mentors now who have been entrepreneurs, I've seen the very same thing where they profess certain ideals, but man, they make a lot of mistakes that are contradictory to the very ideals that they profess. So when it comes to the selfless business, a similar view should be considered. The concept that it's very humans that are running all of these, that we're not inherently selfless at all times, should be acceptable. But if we are there 51% of the time, are we not pushing the ball forward? And if the business model practice works 51% or greater of the time, are we not pushing the ball forward? Should we focus on the positive more than we are the negative? There's a number of imperfect options and all sorts of decisions being made. So consider it in your valuation of 5149. Not only of your own ideas, that it may not be perfect as you're thinking of that next product, the next service in the development process, to allow for maybe you goal towards 80-20 in Pareto, okay? Let's say you come up 51-49 after you look at all the metrics. Give yourself that opportunity and that grace to say, at least we are moving the ball forward and we're not hurting people in the 49, right? It's not that you can hurt folks in the 49 and therefore it's okay. Of course, that's not what I'm saying at the moment. But consider that very idea, and that will allow yourself to move forward. And when it comes to the selfless business, that is so important. Because we do, when we think of those very qualities in the golden rule, think in these singular 1 or 0, and it's not. I want to show you this video. And it is the principle of the Oakland Buddha. Has anybody heard of the Oakland Buddha? All right, now you're gonna.
Well, a small gesture makes a big impact on an East Bay neighborhood. John Ramos on the addition that led to a remarkable change.
When this blocked-off street in Oakland became a magnet for drug sales and illegal dumping, one neighbor had an inspired idea. He bought a small Buddha statue at Ace Hardware and placed it in the median.
And then after that, we build little by little.
Local Buddhists got to work, and the statue has now become a full-fledged miniature temple, drawing dozens of Chinese and Vietnamese neighbors to the site every day.
Is this place really important to you?
Yeah, very important for me. I believe Buddha. I very believe the Buddha.
And miraculously, as the structure grew, the crime and blight began disappearing, and neighbors who don't even speak the same language became connected. So when the city decided this was a danger that should be removed, it got a unified response.
And we all wrote to the city and we're like, you better not tear this down. This is something that is, a part of our space here, and it's made our...
So far, the city has shown an inspired wisdom by allowing the temple to remain.
I mean, it's the people taking initiative and cleaning up our own space. Like, we're doing it. It's really, it's well protected. We all look after it. It's definitely it's a part of our community now, for sure.
And besides, it's always easier dealing with City Hall when you have friends in high places. In Oakland, John Ramos, KPIX 5.
Ironically, the statue was first placed there about 5 years ago by a neighbor who is not a Buddhist. He just thought it would help beautify the neighborhood.
So it pays to go to Ace Hardware, is where he went to get that Buddha. And that citizen of that resident of that area in Oakland, not a Buddhist, what's the point of the principle of the Oakland Buddha? And the principle is the idea of the little things count, right? This is a little thing. This particular resident, Dan Stevenson, said, I am tired of this being a dumping ground. And I'm just going to go down to the Ace Hardware and put this little thing here. And the idea of him practicing that which he does every day, which is thinking of other people and the way he lived each and every day, is the way businesses can operate too. The idea of you're not always going to hit the sports analogy grand slam, instead the singles and the bunts will get you there. His bunt was this Oakland Buddha. And what happened is when he put that there, as you saw, it was just this little statue. And then another resident, I think that was Quang Lam in this story, said, oh, you got to put a house around it, shelter, and then it grew with side altars next to it. And so the little things along the way built a lot of muscle tone along the way for Dan. And Dan doing that is part of the way a selfless business should also consider. That it is the little things that build the muscle tone and the sinew I brought up earlier. And that in the end, this little Oakland Buddha can turn out to be something quite big, especially when they saw in this corner where there would be drug dumps and deals, crime went down by 82%, as was said in the story. And that is the idea of the principle of the Oakland Buddha. Some of the ideas that we should consider. So that's kind of our second stop and part of our conversation about 4.0, some specific examples of where we might be turning and some of the ideas that might be part of this. And as I've gone through this with different discussions, what are those principles that might be part of this new dolphin business? So thanks for listening. And now I really do get the hook. And Erica's going to come up here.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. Okay, so there's a million places that I feel like we could go with this, and we don't have a million minutes of time, unfortunately. We have about 5 minutes left, students. So here's the deal. You're going to have an in-class assignment before we leave today, within the next 5 minutes. So pay attention real quick, okay? One of the things I want to touch on with this is, obviously this class is about startups, about entrepreneurship, founding companies, the environment in which that's being done. You yourself just came up from South by Southwest, where you were at earlier this week, speaking about related issues. How's the reception to the notion of the selfless economy and dolphin principles? How is the startup community otherwise receiving this?
You know, I think the very idea of it is at South by and the conferences I've been going to in the last maybe year or two, everybody's trying to recreate. You want to sit down over here really fast? Sure. Okay. Has been reconsidering why they're getting together. So as I brought up earlier, the very idea of the care economy is huge right now. And the care economy was something that was always on the side. But now it's main stage, and what does that mean? The care economy means a lot of different things in terms of not only family caregiving, professional caregiving, but also healthcare. But the name itself in South by Southwest and other places, the fact that it's being part of the parlance and the vernacular that we're using right now, I think is very indicative of how, at least for the moment, as the doors open, we're starting to use different words. And we're doing it in every single place that you would not think you'd see it.
Where are you most surprised you're seeing it right now?
Well, I think I mentioned this last time. I was very surprised I saw it in Davos. Yeah, it was not that I had a strict view that they would never discuss such an idea, but it was more of at which it was resonating. It resonated in ways that wasn't like, oh, here we go. Oh, there we go. You know, oh, this is another one of those, you know, tree-hugging, Birkenstock-wearing things. So that was really surprising for me, consistently across all the spaces where typically I wouldn't see that being discussed.
The thought that there could be a parallel appreciation and value for this across our society right now is exciting. We're at a time, of course, where society feels fractured. We feel like it's become increasingly divided, and we see each other as more and more distant. We're in our own bubbles. Without kind of leading the witness here, what are the obstacles to selflessness and the selfless economy being the bridge between this divide? Because it feels like there's a real potency and ability to do that. But what are the obstacles? What are the main challenges to this happening?
It was like why I dug down on some examples today. Like, what are the case studies? Does this really work? Are you just, you know, hoping? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to do more over the coming year and dig deeper into these case examples. There aren't a lot. If you look at all the case studies that are out there, it's a case study on selfless/dolphin business. It's not out there, right? We were writing them over the last 3 years. We'll be writing them now. So it's one of my interests, and I think all of you will be the ones that will create those new best practices is really the idea. Whatever those new best practices that came out of the last 3 years will be your businesses. So we have yet to codify, I believe, what they are and then document them. But the mind shift is important as the beginning. And I was just at CSW, which is a focus each and every year at the United Nations, focusing on gender equality and gender equity. And I was just there yesterday talking about feminist data. Feminist data. Where does data come from? Who's creating it? What's in the very supply chain of data? And does it include women equally? It does not. And one of the data points that my not-for-profit figured out is that if you have DEI, ERG, or BRG programs, guess what? 90% of women will stay at their business longer than they would have otherwise.
It's a revolutionary number.
And that is twice the number if you don't have that. So that's the thinking out there, and that's why I'm saying the thinking is changing. That's a staggering difference, whether you have these programs or whether you don't.
Yeah, the market is showing what's possible with it.
They're thinking of others, because the majority of business runners, owners, board directors, executive leadership are not these faces. But the fact that they're thinking this way,
this is encouraging. We've got a few minutes. Students, as I mentioned in the beginning of class, it's okay to not understand all this. The notion is that it's in your head as a kernel of thought to start going off of. With that, please throw out a question or two, because we're about to jump into an assignment as well. So if there's points of clarity you would like, ask the question around it. Show of hands for anyone who might have such a question. Oh, you already put it up there.
yeah,
see that
we
you
did.
flipped
I did it because you told me to do that.
All right. You jumped ahead of me, man.
No, you told me to do it.
It's your show. I don't want to get in your way.
No, you said it at the beginning. You said it over there. And I was running the slides.
Okay.
Not very readily, but I was doing the slides.
Well, assign it. Let them know.
Well, they did. They already responded.
They're already in? My gosh.
But
Okay.
let's go to, if you want to say something first.
Yeah, or if you texted something that you want to expand on, now's your time to have the stage.
Hello.
Way up there. Go ahead.
Yes. So after listening to your speech, I was just wondering if you knew about Simon Sinek, because he wrote a book called The Infinite Game, which I thought related quite deeply to what you're talking about with the selfless economy, just in the way that he's talking about how prioritizing sustainability and long-term thinking is beneficial for economic growth and for the future of the economy at large.
What resonated from that book to you, and what's your name?
My name is Mara. What resonated with me was just how I think it was very interesting to see how he was making lots of connections between both the economy and also with government. He made some allusions to the Cold War thinking and just the differences between short and long-term planning with the U.S. Foreign policy. And I thought that related quite heavily to what you're saying, because it just showed that I think a lot of the current practices that we're using to try to move forward in terms of the economy, in terms of foreign policy, aren't predicated on goals that look far enough out in the future to allow them to actually kind of stack gains on top of each other. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on that book, his work, and if you could just elaborate more on different areas in which you think this mindset could be applied.
Hey, thanks for that. I think a whole bunch of different places, and again, these authors are amazing thinkers, Parm, and my immediate response to that book's focus is that there is a great opportunity not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. So these current structures, shareholder value is thrown out a lot as either you love it or you hate it, but how about you love it and you adjust it, or you hate it and you adjust it? And I think many of these books need to drill down, okay, so then how do we adjust, right? What's the practical step? Give me the processes to get there. And I think there's a lot of great ideas out there, and I support both that book as well as several others that I've been reading along with you, so we're students together on this, is that in a true sort of Michigan approach, show me how it's done. And from a Ross perspective over at the business school where I was taught is show me the action-based processes, the action-based thinking to get me there. And that's where I'd really like to drill down on. So authors like the one you read and a couple others have started to do that, right? And I think those are the books that and thinkers that I sort of lean towards. Read a couple of these?
Yeah, let's read a couple of these, and then students will break class after maybe 3 of these.
Shall I just read 3? Okay, yeah. I think the Dolphin Principles works because it prioritizes long-term benefits over short-term wins. Such a strategy is guaranteed to win in the long run because it allows gains to stack over time. A Dolphin Principle is business philosophy that focuses on the benefit of the all involved parties over the just profit, the scale of the dolphin principle spans from a traditional exclusive mindset to a completely public-driven organization like a nonprofit. A dolphin principle is like an idea of successful businesses which create change by looking at the positives being generated. Like the 51-49 rule, the overall majority of change can still be significant. Patagonia still creates profits even though it is a B Corp, and also has a secret 50% off sale right now for men if you go to their website.
Code CFE.
Yeah, I don't work
absolutely.
for Yvonne, but I should.
It's
I
okay.
really should. One more. The dolphin principle is the idea that people learn better when they are engaged in activities that are enjoyable and stimulating, just like dolphins perform better in captivity when they are given toys and playmates. By applying this principle to education and other areas of life, individuals can increase their motivation, retention, and overall performance. Yeah, and the reason why I put around the idea of a dolphin principle as I described there, I'll read one more before I answer that. The idea of a dolphin principle would be a principle of visible effect. To me, this means in order to propagate the ideas of the care economy, it is essential to see the effects of your work in order to make your work mentally sustainable. Yeah, and you like all those comments, and I can read more, but what I really do like about that last one is when, and you notice the data point I brought up in the study that we had done regarding the idea of these inclusion programs, and data for data's sake, fine. A lot of the data we look at is photographic data as opposed to solution-based data and action-based data. And so the one I just brought up, that 1 point of 90% staying longer, and that's double if you don't have it, that's solution-based, isn't it? And I think the way we should focus on encouraging your businesses, whatever business you're going to create or own right now, is what is the data that encourages you and shows you the way, as opposed to what won't work. We have a lot of what doesn't work. How about some data around what does work?
And CFE would love to help you figure that out. Come in anytime, and we will be there. Thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Sorry, only got one question. That's it? Only got one question.
Okay, I'll send you this later, and I'll send you my favorite episode. Okay, I'm gonna go grab my stuff. Where do I just put this back here?
You know the locker?
Yes.